I think we're live now.
Hey.
Hey, and welcome to this Google Hangout on air in the MOOC course, Greening the Economy, Lessons from Scandinavia. My name is Peter Anfalk, and I'm here today with two of my colleagues, Beatrice and Håkan Rode. Unfortunately, Philip Peck couldn't make it today, but we'll try to cover those areas where Philip was thought to respond to some of the questions here. And as we've done the previous weeks, we will try to fight some of those questions that you have raised in the forums and the issues that you have raised in the forums during the week, particularly this third week that deals with the corporate or the business perspective on greening the economy here. Also, as previous weeks, we send live now. We will also be recording it so that it will be you will be able to view it afterwards via YouTube. And with that, I would like to give the word for a short while for my colleagues here to give a brief presentation on who are you, Beatrice.
Okay. Hi, so my name is Beatrice Kog, and I work here at the Institute since, 2000, actually. And I'm a researcher and a teacher, and my research focused mainly on the things that I was talking to you about in the short recorded lecture. That is, I look at how companies engage with environmental but also social issues when those issues arise upstream in the supply chain.
Excellent. And Håkan, I think they've met you before.
They have. Just to remind you, I mean, while Beatrice has a business background, I have an engineering background myself, and I more kind of closely work with manufacturing and the greening of those processes. So we kind of complement each other here in this respect. So I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Let's dig into the questions that we collected from the forums this week. One of those things that our CTAs have been asked to respond to is concerning the assignment that we have. Greener products, businesses, and cities. And particularly the question where we ask you to make a distinction in between greening by and greening off the products, cities, and businesses. So what does this actually mean? Well, it's not a perfectly clear-cut definition in between them, and so there's definitely room for you to elaborate on that, and this is exactly what we want you to do. So the room for interpretation on it, and this is kind of the learning exercise we would like you to do. But to be able for you to refer to and think of what in the pathways that we were thinking of when we divided in between greening by and greening off. I'd like to say a few words and perhaps give some few examples here. So when it comes to the greening off, that means greening by improving the environmental or social performance of a product, business, or city itself. So, and greening by would be greening, like overall on a societal level, with the help of a product, business, or city. So that's kind of the definition part of it, or the division in between them here. So if we look into a couple of examples, then I need to read from the list here. So I've noted down a couple of examples. I don't know them by heart here. So if we look into a computer here, greening off a computer, it could be if you manufacture the computer with free of toxic heavy metals, flame retardants. It could be that it's designed to be energy efficient. having like energy save mode, which would then affect the user face. It could be that it is designed to be upgradable, modular design, or designed for disassembly, so that it's easy to recycle. Or it could be kind of different kind of product setup here. A thin client, having one server and simple terminals that on an overall level would be a lesser environmental impact if you instead of buying a lot of full-fledged computers here. So that was kind of a couple of examples of greening of a product, but greening by, that could be not greening the product itself, but with the help of the product. That would be, for example, a windmill. We don't green the windmill itself, but with the help of the windmill, we could actually produce renewable energy. Or if we go back and return to the computer example, we would have, with the help of the computer, it can facilitate telework or virtual meetings, so which indirectly can reduce travel needs. So that's with the help of this product. Or it could be like a software. It could be like Craigslist or some other kind of like second-hand markets selling things online, making it easier to reuse things and lowering the transaction costs. So that's a way where you could exemplify greening by products here. If you then look into business, the focus of this week, let's think of how you could do the greening of the business. Well, if we again stick to the computer example, we could say that in the factory producing the computers, it would be like resource efficient processes using less energy, water, chemicals, other resources in the production, better health and safety regulations within the factory, better wastewater waste management. It could also be in the life cycle here or in the product chain, requirements and improvements upstream from the components that they're buying here, take back schemes downstreams, or entirely new business schemes. Greening by a business, then it becomes a little bit more tricky here, and we start to get overlaps here. But we can think of like a business that's not greening the business itself, but with the help of the business that they do, you would actually gain environmental improvements, like a company insulating houses, bless you, for energy efficiency. It could be prolonging the life of products, repair or reuse, refurbishment, offering car sharing schemes, bicycle-based package delivery, or virtual dematerialized alternatives to travel and physical products. So indirectly through the business, not the business itself that's being green, but indirectly by the services that they services or products that they provide, that you would get on a societal level, you would get an environmental improvement. City, we can think of greening of a city, could be the sewage plants, it could be building a sewage plant, or it could be improving it, adding another step, like a biological step to an old sewage plant, taking care of the nitrogen. It could be reducing energy use in lighting. It could be if the city is offering a public transport scheme, it could be that they transfer over to run them on biogas. It would be improving or installing new waste management schemes here, like source separation and so on for the city. Greening by could be, sorry, becomes a bit lengthy, but I want to provide the examples here. Greening by the city, it could be the city changing or introducing special parking standards which is very effective when it comes to shifting the way that we drive, or the use of passenger cars here, on how many parking lots that you actually need to install for when you build a house here. It could be building bicycle lanes, designated bus lanes, or pedestrian streets that would change our mobility patterns here. It could be programs and standards for contractors on the energy efficiency in buildings, requirements, or making incentives for contractors or the construction industry actually to build more energy efficient buildings here. Or restrictions on malls on the outskirts of town, affecting travel patterns. So those are some examples that we've been thinking that, yes, these could be illustrative examples of the greening of and greening by within those different categories. So I hope that this will clarify a little bit. Probably it will spark a lot of discussions, but it made us go back and discuss this. So, but what I want to say is that, yes, this is an exercise for you, and there's no absolute yes or no, or clear-cut borders in between those. But what we want you to do is to ponder about it and to give a good explanation on why you think that it's greening off or greening by in the different categories. We're looking forward to your input, and we can see that we already have got several submitted assignments here. So that on that. Bea, we have got a question on, or discussion in the forum here on circular economy versus green economy. And we had in one of the lectures, or actually interviews, we had Per Stoltz coming in and from IKEA, and talking about his work on, or their work on circular economy, and relating that to green economy here. So and I think when we asked him, he said, what's the connection in between green and circular economy? And said the common denominator was economy. And that's a very clever answer here. But perhaps you can help us to understand where does the circular economy fit into the green economy? Is it part of it, or is it the next evolutionary step?
Yeah.
Tough one.
Well, I think some people would probably like to argue that it's the next step. And clearly there are ideas within the concept of circular economy which are sort of taking us further from a traditional way of thinking, or the more linear way of thinking about resource efficiency and eco-design. They add a new element to that line of thinking by sort of arguing that a key prerequisite for us to reach some sort of sustainable society is that we start thinking in linear principles, and that in that thought, resource efficiency is not enough, and it may not even necessarily be the ultimate objective. In the cradle-to-cradle school of thought, you talk about resource effectiveness, which essentially argue that if you have a circular system where you can take care of the materials that flow through society, efficiency becomes less important, because if you make sure that there are no kind of wastage along the cycle, then you don't have to think about efficiency. But I think that discussion sort of distracts a little bit from what I believe is the key differences between these two concepts and how they interact a little bit. Because I think one way of understanding these two different concepts and what we can is to start asking ourselves, what is it that we can take from them, and how can they be useful for us? And if we look at how green economy has been defined, for instance, in the UNEP paper, they define it as the green economy is something which generates improved human well-being and social equity while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. So it essentially in the definition talks about the outcomes that we're looking for in a way. And the discussion and the focus, I think, the big focus in the sort of literature and the discussion about a green economy is very much on what can governments do, and it's essentially an argument saying that it's good to channel investments into green investments, sort of, and to create, to use our political tools like regulation and fees and taxes and all of that in order to trigger investments to go into green investments. And essentially what they're saying is that that will not only help us address the environmental problems that we're facing, but it would actually also generate growth and prosperity. And increasingly we're also talking about not just the increase of growth and prosperity, but also how we divide that growth and prosperity. But if we look at how a circular economy is defined, again, like with the green economy, this sort of concept has lots of different people use it in slightly different ways, and its origin can come from. There are different people sort of feeding, or different lines of thought feeding into that concept. The same goes with circular economy. We can trace many kind of ideas that has fed into the creation of this concept: biomimicry, industrial ecology, performance economy, cradle-to-cradle thinking. So again, it's a sort of an amalgamation of different ideas and principles, but and there's no uniform definition of this as well. But there is a sort of convergence around the definition that is offered by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we can see that many people are sort of ending up there. And if we look at the way they define a circular economy and compare that to how we define or how UNEP defines a green economy, they focus a lot more on what the system would look like. So they talk about that the circular economy is grounded in the study of nonlinear, particularly living systems, and it's an industrial economy that is restorative by intention and design. It replaces the end of life with restoration and stuff like that. So in that definition, it describes sort of the nature of the industrial system, where a green economy describes what we want from a functioning economy, and focusing on sort of giving the message that it's a good thing to invest in green stuff. Circular economy tells us a little bit about what that system might look like. And with that added emphasis that there is a need for circularity if we're going to achieve the goals that we have in terms of dealing with resource efficiency and energy efficiency and those kinds of things. So again, I'm being far too late, and I'm not sure I'm highlighting things, but I think it's hard to say that. I wouldn't say that a circular economy, the concept, replaces the green economy concept. I would say that they serve slightly different uses, but that there are also significant overlaps in the fundamental ideas that sort of goes into what it is that we want. Sort of.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, the fundamental things that we actually do. I think it's really, I mean, you put it very well, Beatrice. I mean, a circular economy really comes from ideas like cleaner production, resource efficiency, eco-efficiency coming up. So it's kind of grounded in that kind of industrial reality, kind of how we are trying to make an industrial thing more compatible with the environment. Whereas the green economy is a kind of a top-down thing. It doesn't really come from the industrial reality. It comes from the governments and hey, let's try to shift our economy, you know, and make shift those investments.
Even though we try to slice it up in this course here.
Of course
we have one national level here, but we also try to interpret and see what does this mean also in individual city level and a business level, and from what you've been arguing, it's very much on on the production, cleaner production, the production side, closing the loop on the business level. So it sounds like it's very relevant to discuss it here in the business module here.
Well, it is, but the circular economy goes broader than that. Obviously, they talk about circularity on a big scale, so post-consumer circularity, all of that. So, and also on a societal level with cascading between the waste of one industry becoming the input of another, and that kind of thing. So, but I think the key.
But still, we're still discussing industries here.
Absolutely, being relevant to industries, and being relevant to politicians from a different type of perspective, in that it describes a role model for a society that politicians can steer us towards. In my perception of the green economy, it doesn't really give us the operational suggestions for what we should do, but obviously in the green economy concept, it's clear that the expectations is that changes needs to happen on all levels that we go through in this course. So changes needs to happen on the individual level, on the city level, the business level, on the political level. So.
But it sounds a little bit like the assignment. There are no clear-cut borders in between them.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for elaborating on that, Bea. We're much wiser now on that. Excellent. Let's move on. We have a specific question on planned obsolescence here. And I saw a program some years ago from Livermore in California, where they were celebrating this centennial light bulb. Now it's apparently 114 years that it's been illuminating non-stop here, the longest burning light bulb in history. Which is great for the janitor, doesn't have to change it, but perhaps not for the light bulb business. If all the light bulbs would burn forever here. But today, products we produce are not designed to last that long. So we design them to become old and obsolete. So we need to buy new ones, which is good for business. But the question that we have got here, so can or should planned obsolescence be forbidden from an environmental point of view, or at least restricted here, considering the view of new business models here, how to shift from a business model of planned obsolescence to green growth? And then I turn to Håkan. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That was an interesting one. I don't know. I mean, of course, kind of planned obsolescence, I guess it's something that you, in reality, do find in a variety of products. And and I think kind of the fundamental message, which most of you then have got right there, I mean, it's that planned obsolescence is not really a good thing from an environmental point of view. I mean, it goes at odds with, the longevity, the modularity, recyclability, repairability, all of these eco-design strategies that you could use here. So that does become an issue here. Of course, kind of you have to be, and it's, well, in a way, of course, it's also very easy to see that kind of from a business standpoint, it can make sense. If you forget about the environment for a while and say that, well, if you as a business want to sell more products, you design with a limited lifetime, and then you hope to be able to sell new ones at a certain standpoint. Sure. Of course, you have to be a little bit careful here with reasoning here. One thing is, if we go back to your example here with your old light bulb that you liked, the old shining light bulb. I mean, as you said, it's kind of good for the janitor. It's not so good for the light bulb company, but maybe it's actually very good for the energy company, because the energy use in this light bulb will be much higher than a modern light bulb. So it could make a good sense to actually replace that one and kind of limit its life length. It could be in the overall interest of the environment to do so.
Maybe perhaps not that particular light bulb. I think they would be very sad. If
That's
do
your
that.
special light bulb here. And of course, we should keep that one running there. So there are cases when there is kind of a quick technical advancement where things actually should be replaced. And I don't know. I mean, for example, here in Sweden, we have. We got our environmental NGOs arguing that we should kind of throw out our old fridges, and install a new one. And then they have to realize that, yes, we have to manufacture the new fridges. But on the other hand, they're so much more energy efficient. So it actually, overall, it would make good sense for the environment to do so.
There is the argument that if you do have, if there is an environmental argument to plan for obsolescence, because there are technological advances that makes it better for the environment to replace, like with the fridges. But what you would then ideally want from the company is that they have a very good system for taking back those products which they plan to become obsolete, and that they reuse them to the maximum amount, so that only effectively we update that which needs to be updated in the product, and that the rest of it we can reuse to as a high degree as possible.
Does that require a new business model? Leasing or?
But I mean, certainly facilitate the companies that we've seen that are very good examples of this, like Xerox and stuff. They have, of course, used that type of different ways of selling their product, or leasing instead of selling.
And I mean, also kind of nowadays when we see things like that products are increasingly more dependent on kind of the software setup rather than the actual hardware. The same with planned obsolescence comes in another light here when it's, will I get the new upgrade or not? And the company actually will decide that, whether it will or not. And well, that will decide how many years I will have my camera before it's kind of, well, it's worth buying a new one, because it's they don't upgrade the old one with firmware anymore, or so. So I mean, the whole thing will get a little bit. You could easily foresee that this thing will get a little bit more complex down the line. But it's very clear then that kind of as you were talking about, Peter, kind of the business model with functional sales, and having this idea that, okay, if we let the companies own the thing, and then kind of they can plan whatever they do, they will have to take it back and try to maximize the value from it anyhow. So, and then it might make sense for the companies to have a kind of the same life length of many components, which is kind of one of the thingies with planned obsolescence.
There's this example, Fairphone,
right,
where they actually did take in that problem with upgrading of the sort of software of it into the design of the hardware of the product. And I don't remember exactly how they did that, but they have on their website lots of information to look at. So it can be one inspiring example of how a company has been thinking about this issue.
That's good. And I mean, going back to your first question, Peter, there, I mean, can we prohibit this or something? I think it's a pretty difficult thing to interfere in these market. It's kind of basic fundamental market forces, kind of that companies should compete and create new products that are attractive. So, but of course, it's kind of it's something for us consumers to think about, kind of to have as a key criteria when we buy things, that we want something that's long living, it's upgradable, it's recyclable, etc. And yeah, and why not look for something where we don't even own the product? We just let the company own it, and we lease it instead.
Back to the consumer.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Håkan and Bea, on that. Shedding light on that. Let's move on to another question here. That is on regarding these environmental management systems, and the most common one here would be the ISO 14001. And the question is, how effective is ISO 14001 certification? are they effective? I guess the question is regarding whether towards a more greener economy, or is it a better than nothing solution here? So again, perhaps I could ask you, Håkan, here to start by saying a few words about like what is an EMS or environmental management system? What is it in general, and ISO 14001 in particular?
Oh, okay. The basic lecture. Okay.
Don't be too, yeah.
Yeah, no, but I mean, let's not go into too much details on
No.
the ISO 14001. Obviously, we're speaking about a system. It's kind of it's an international standard developed by industry themselves in order to have a standard particularly for environmental management, meaning that an environmental management of a company, saying that what are environmental issues, what objectives should we have for those, what kind of programs, indicators should we have, and how do we follow that up. And the classic thing of thinking around those is to say a plan, do, check, act cycle, Deming cycle, just as kind of the quality assurance systems that we usually have. And that is that's kind of I think it's a very good question that's posed. I mean, I think you guys are who put these questions in the forums. I think it's very good. I mean, that's a critical stance to this, and you should be critical. And I think ISO 14001, as with all other stuff, you can really have a reason to be critical in some sense. And the key criticism, of course, here lies in that ISO 14001 doesn't really guarantee any sort of level of environment, except that it's kind of better than the legal standards. So you could basically be a pretty high polluter as long as you're polluting, you have a license to pollute, and you still have your ISO 14001 certificate, no problem.
So there's no guarantee that it's a greener company.
It guarantees that it's not a bad company, you could say. But I mean, on the other hand, then you could say that does mean that this is kind of not a very meaningful thing. And then I would say, no, absolutely not. I mean, ISO 14001 is absolutely an essential step for any organization. It doesn't have to be ISO 14001. We can think of other environmental management systems, but basically, if you don't have a system, if you don't have a structure to environmental management, you will go nowhere. So it is a kind of a fundamental prerequisite to actually do things out there in industry. Of course, we can think of, in different settings, it's more or less useful. But if we go back in the old days when environment wasn't a very big thing in companies, if it basically was putting a filter up on the stack and measuring a little bit of the emissions, then those tasks were not so many, and you don't really need a system for it. Not so many people were involved. Nowadays, environmental management in a corporation involves lots of people. And lots of people, the way they do things will define how much you emit and how much waste you produce, how well you sort, etc., how well you design your products, how well you procure. And it becomes immensely complex. Corporations are immensely complex. So unless you have some sort of a system here around this, I'm sorry, it doesn't work. So yeah, you need a system.
So it's good to have the system at least, and then you have people, they know what to do, and they're reporting it, they're being transparent with it, and so so a good starting point, at least, or a platform to work from.
I think it's sure it is a fundamental step, and it also requires you that you have the management coming reviewing this on a yearly basis. So it becomes an issue for the top management. And you also, if you're certified, it means that someone else comes to your company and takes a look, hey, what are you doing here? And you have to explain it. And that's also a very useful thing, because that forces you to consider your stuff and see what you're doing. So there are very many important aspects, and In reality, also you could say that ISO 14001 has become some sort of a driver's license for many markets. If you want to be in a market, you're required to have this.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really say anything how good your specific products are from an environmental point of view, but at least you're operating at some sort of minimum standards. And yeah, and of course you could also say that if you have a supplier, I think that's a particularly interesting case actually. If you have a supplier and you require them to have ISO 14001, then you can be more sure that if you put a requirement on them that they should not have this thing in their product or in a certain way, then that that will be a part of their environmental management system, and this will be checked and verified by external auditors. So then it's more likely to be true.
Good. Do you want to add to that, Bea?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I saw a study, which I read very briefly. I should have read it better, but they made an interesting study. They took a company which was already in legal compliance, and it was a well-managed company, and then they made a case study of when they implemented an ISO 14001. So after they were already knew that they were in compliance, and then they were trying to analyze what were the effects in a company that was essentially well run from the start, and they still found that we still see progress from this. So even if you have a company that sort of fulfills the minimum requirements of an ISO 14001, implementing the system will generate improvement, or did in this particular case. So, and I think that's often what companies find with these systems, that because it becomes a formalized approach where we need to really think through what we're doing, and it becomes a repetitive thing, so it becomes ingrained, and that has effects for the type of decisions that we make in companies and how we manage our daily operations.
Well, as with all certificates, there's always a risk for corrupt systems
For sure.
and so on. So that also, of course, becomes an issue here as well. We should also remember that kind of ISO 14001, of course, makes even much more. It's better. It makes more sense for the big companies who are more complex in their operations. If you're a small company, you have few people, small operations. If you're in a supply chain, you might be required to use it, but you might want a kind of slightly more simplified environmental management system in that respect. But that'll be the only thing, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Håkan and Bea, on that, on the environmental management system and ISO 14001 in particular. Let's look into other standards here, ethical standards in industry. We've seen that there's been a discussion on that, and we've got a question. What are some of the more effective ways that companies are verifying compliance with ethical standards in the production process, working conditions, including environmental standards, etc.? And this is something I think that I know that you've been looking into, Bea.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the start, let's just be clear about the fact that there are good audits and there are bad audits. So that you can have an audit and you can learn a lot about a company and what goes on there, both in terms of social compliance and labor rights, health and safety, all those things, and environmental performance. And you can do an audit where you learn very little about what the real situation is. Now, what I've been looking at mostly is when you do audits, not of your own company, but of actors in the supply chain, so where you don't have a hierarchical chain of control or chain of command over them. So what makes a good audit and what makes a bad audit? It's really about the resources. I mean, typically it's about the resources that you put into it. Do we have trained people, skilled people that come and do the audits? Because a lot of the time, both with environmental and social issues, what we're talking about is something that we can call credence goods. So I can't look at this pen and say, okay, it's been produced by people who were treated fairly and paid adequately, or I cannot look at it and say, okay, the energy that was used to produce it was clean energy, or the wastewater was treated in a good way. So in all of those things are credence goods, which means that in order to understand something about the sort of environmental and social footprint of this product, I need to go out and check in production what happens. So what we need to find out is that we need to go to where the products are being produced, and we need to understand from environmental sides, we need to look at, okay, what does the technical setup look at on site, and when we look at ethical compliance, we need to understand what's the daily situation for the company, people that work in this company, how are they being paid, how are they being treated, do they understand their own rights, all of these things.
Sorry, when you say we, you say that we need to go out to the company.
Right.
Do we all have to do that? Like when we buy this pen, who are we?
Okay, so typically we would be the company who's buying those things and who is typically under pressure from others to communicate a story about this. So say I'm a pen. I have a company that sells pens. And so it could either be, companies have different drivers to do this. Some do it for their own internal sort of values, that I just want to be a company that takes responsibility for my products in the life cycle perspectives. Others are, pushed by their customers, and yet others are getting this kind of pressure from other types of stakeholders, like investors or insurance companies, increasingly institutional investors. At least in Sweden, we've seen that they come and they put pressure. But so there can be different types of incentives for companies that they want to go out and try to understand what goes on in other tiers upstream in the supply chain. But if we go back to sort of the nitty-gritty of doing audits, which is often referred to when we talk about code of conduct for social and ethical issues, but also is that in order to do a good audit, you need resources, you need skilled personnel that understands what it is that they're going to look for and how they can elicit that information. So how do I make an interview so that I really get the worker that I'm interviewing to tell me the story and feel comfortable in telling me the story? What should I look for in a factory to understand and try to understand whether or not they have the operational procedures in place so that we can assume that the health and safety things are working. And to have enough time. If we try to do an audit of a factory with 10,000 workers and we have 6 hours to do it, you're probably not going to find it very well. So there are all these kind of practical nitty-gritties, things that we can learn about how to do audits. But it doesn't stop there. A lot of the time, once you have the results of the audit, it's also what comes after that. So how do we engage when we find non-compliances? What are the follow-up measures, and how do we work with that? How do we engage? What we typically now is typically discussed is how do we engage so that we move away from a command and control kind of policing it. As we go to a factory, we find problems, we tell them to fix the problem. Now the discussion is typically how do we engage so that the factory themselves take ownership of the process of improving problems that have been identified. That's one part of it. Doing good audits can be...
Sorry. Can't they just rely on, like, there are certification scheme for this as well.
Yeah.
Can't they just have a look and say, well, they've been certified here. We trust them. It's a good certification scheme. We trust them. So let's buy their products or services.
For sure. I mean, from the perspective of the buying company, that is much to be preferred. If there are reliable certification schemes out there, and there are products readily available on the market at a price that I want, that are certified by a reliable certification scheme, that's obviously a lot easier, because then I don't have to invest in the time to either send my own people or hire other people to go and do all of these processes with the inspections and the follow through with working with corrective action and that kind of thing.
Then we don't need to go. They
need to go.
Yeah.
So there's the, you outsource the work, but you also to some extent outsource the risk. So if someone else comes there and say, we find a problem in your pen factory, then it's not me and my auditors who screwed up, it's the certification organization and their auditors who screwed up. So to some extent, it's a double benefit to me as a buying company that I outsource both the sort of work, but also the risk associated with potential non-compliances. It's not always possible to do that. It can be that the products that I need are not out there, so certified products are not available to me at the price that I need them to or the volumes that I needed to, or it can be that I, for other reasons, still want to continue working with the suppliers that I am working with, and then I need to engage on my own. And so there's two sides of it. I think one side is the effectiveness of it. So clearly, for making effective audits is a skill, and that requires sort of specialized skills, and it requires resources, and also the follow through of non-compliances. But then how to make it efficient is another question, and that's where clearly there's huge benefits to be had if we consolidate. So, and that's where standardized schemes come in. So rather than having 10,000 companies having their own code of conduct, sending them out and doing the inspections, if we can agree on a set of criteria and establish a certification body that can sort of verify against that criteria, then all we need to do is to make sure that information flows. And that's obviously cost efficient compared to everyone doing the same thing, essentially.
Do you also see like other effects when it comes to like one company auditing another, auditing B here? But how about the rest of the business? Is this giving implications for other sub-compliers when they're trying to get business into this? Do you see that there's an indirect effect on other businesses as well, like putting these standards and requirements on say subcontractors when it comes to ethical standards?
There is a little bit a push to move to the next tier.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, I have a background in the textile industry, and I must say that in the textile industry, you've been working with code of conduct since the 90s, early 90s, for the very early beginners. And that push to move upstream has been reasonably slow.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, and I've also spoken to NGOs who've sort of been on the push side of it, the ones that have sort of been the ones working to get the textile business to take responsibility. And they also said, well, we think that the challenge of even getting through to the first tier is big enough. So we're not really pushing it further. And I think many textile companies would agree and say the same. But now we are seeing a move further upstream in this tier. We should also be clear that it's far from perfect today. I mean, even companies who've been working with this for many, many years, if you go in and see, there are some organizations that publish, for instance, Fair Labor Organization publish some of the audit reports from their members. And if you go in and say, and they have big ones like Nike and Puma and H&M is there and stuff like that. And so you can go in and see audit reports from factories that supply to these companies. And these are companies that are generally perceived as being committed to their work and fairly good at it. But you still see lots of non-compliances in the factories. And there are certain issues that are persistent, troublesome. So it's a challenging prospect. You can do it well and you can do it less well. There's also like Håkan said, there are also in these systems, there are obviously lots of potential for corruption and cheating and things like that as well. So we always have to be critical in our evaluation of what companies tell us, not just suppliers, but also the companies that buy these. But I also have tremendous respect for the level of the challenge that we are facing.
transparency in this seem to be an important thing also. So,
it's an important thing, and it's a challenging thing. I think. I mean, these systems can be massive. Like you know, H&M. When I did a study of them a few years back, I think they had over 3,000 factories sewing their clothing, and that's just the first year. And then you know, that triggers, and then in the next year you have an additional number, an additional number. So we're talking about a large number of actors, and a system that's also very dynamic, because obviously they will change all the time. So new actors will come in and others will go. Things will change in the factory, so they change their manager, and all of a sudden things change. So,
yeah, well, in your lecture, the graphics in your lecture, you see a lot of this web, not only like a linear thing. It's a growing web with all these first, second, third tiers of tens of thousands of linkages and so on. So I can see the challenge of actually managing that. So thank you very much, Bea. That on ethical standards in industry. It's difficult questions that you give us here. So we're trying to respond as good as possible. Sorry if we have lengthy and perhaps not like the clearest answers, but we're doing our best here to respond to it. I think you did a good job, Bear. It sounded like I told you off there. Sorry for that. Yeah, I'm thinking more about myself here. We have another really tricky question here. As Håkan said, you asked some good questions here, and we're challenging ourselves to try to bring them up and try to respond to them. One has to do with rebound effects. And as we're in the business model discussing business and industry today, this week here, how to prevent the rebound effect, particularly in business. And that is a really, really good question that I don't know if anyone could actually answer that in a good and correct way. But let's at least look into that question and see what we can and discuss and see what can be done here. Let's start with what do we mean by rebound effects here? Like on the basic level, like by making things more efficient, we can save energy, we can save money, and we can save time, and that's good. We're making things, say, more eco-efficient from kind of greening point of view here. The challenge or the problem here is that some of these saved resources, they can be used and often used for consuming more of the same thing or another thing, reducing in or resulting in reduced net savings there when it comes to these, for example, energy savings here. Or sometimes the entire savings can be kind of eaten up or consumed by alternative behavior here. So let's take a simple example. Like the rebound effect was starting to be discussed, the oil crisis in the 70s, and what happened much here in the northern part of the northern hemisphere would be that we started to we had these houses and consuming a lot of oil for trying to heat them. We insulated them, and when we insulated the houses, we would actually cut down on the energy bill here. So we actually did a saving on energy. What happened then? Well, we saved a lot of money on that, energy and money. What did we use the money for? Well, we had a tendency of building bigger houses because we could afford to actually heat bigger houses. And in the Nordic sphere, we also tend to say, okay, let's build a sauna. So we consumed all the energy that we saved in the saunas here.
Saunas are essential for life. So it's kind of,
yeah, of course. I'm touching on a holy grail here. So, yeah. Or another example that we calculated in European projects some years ago, the impact of making trucks more efficient, and there's been a remarkable development on for the motors, and also on cutting down on emissions when it comes to truck development here. We're especially more energy efficient. Also, we have intelligent transport system that makes them smarter. We can avoid congestions, and we can find the smartest routes. We can actually have programs where we can pack them in the best way, so we get large filling factor in the trucks. And what does this mean? Well, what this results in that it makes them the truck alternative more attractive. So of course we buy more truck transport. And even it becomes so efficient that we actually start attracting transport from other transport modes, like train or surface transport or boat here. So there becomes a rebound effect on making this trucks more efficient, because we actually drive more. So we get more ton kilometers of truck transport. So these are some examples of rebound effects that we see in society here. But let's move into one example here. I've been working a number of years with a number of organizations in Sweden, trying to introduce virtual meetings. Instead of replacing business meetings, especially in a number of state agencies in Sweden, which has been successful, and the usage has increased enormously the last number of years, and we see that it improves their efficiency. They save a lot of time through this. A lot of money can be saved through these virtual meetings. But then we have to look into so like how much of these can actually have resulted in net reductions of travel. Well, we don't see that much. What happens is that we release time by running these meetings. We actually have the possibility to reduce, to cut and substitute some of the business meetings. What is this money and the time used for? Well, it's used for more business, and it's used for more work. So it's eaten up, at least partly, by more consumption or more work here. But you have to go into kind of the basic question: are the organizations aware of this effect? Do they care about the effect? And do they actually want to prevent the effects here? It's like, well, if you look into a business, the business is there to make business, to create revenues here. And if we save money, if we release resources, we can increase revenues, and we can use that to invest into other business as well. That's a natural effect that we'll get. Saving time will make the organization more efficient and get more output per input here. And so it will be used extensively for more work, more meetings, more projects, more contracts, requiring occasional travel. But the potential in here would be that if you have an organization becoming more efficient, getting more revenues, they would also become more competitive and often more successful. And often those organizations that are more successful and that are kind of leading in the market have the advantage and have the luxury of actually being able to set aside more time and resources to actually think about environmental and social issues. So that's like a potential for the company to actually do something about start thinking about and fighting the rebound effects. And if the rebound effect would be that we would actually get, in this case, more time and more money for more travel, they would have to sit down and think, do we have to set up goals on and targets for travel and for emissions? So, and then they would have to take an active stance to cut travel budgets, lowering travel allowances, cutting down on company cars, actually actively work on that so that the travel alternatives become less attractive. Otherwise, we will see business as usual. So not only giving the alternative here, that would be the virtual meeting forms, but actually working on the alternative as well. So the rebound, identifying what the rebound can be, and cutting down on it. So, but that's on a business side within the business, and I guess we need to, when it comes to the societal factors as well, what you do in your spare time and so on, we'll have rebound effects there. But we won't fit that into this hour. Yeah, that's a little thinking on the rebound effect. What can be done? There's no clear answer on that, but those are two of the factors that we actually have the capacity to start thinking about it and doing something about it. Do you have something to add on that?
No. No.
That's a big issue.
Yeah.
No, but I think we've done our time now.
We've done our time,
so,
yes.
Let's be fair and conclude this.
Okay, thank you very much. We had our hour now. Thank you for listening, and thank you for chipping in here. And good luck with finalizing the assignment here and with the quizzes. And we welcome you for the next module, which is the city module, starting Monday next week. Have a good weekend. Take care. Stay green. See you.